Uh, Hello?
Hello, Lou.
Hello, Mr. Executive Secretary, Director Koenig, Czar.
Hey, you works pretty good, Lou.
This is Greg Carlos, and Mr. Chairman's there, and I see Mayor Evans. This is great. And this is great. Welcome. Sorry to be a little late.
No. I think we're right on time here. I was a little late, and there's Natalie.
Leave it to Lou to be this first one to speak up.
Well, Natalie, you've been speaking so well. I just thank you for all you're doing for our state. Excellent work with the governor's plan. You're the best. We know that.
Thank you, Lou.
So sorry to interrupt. And again, I want to see if Terry, are you on? The slowest part of this is unmuting ourselves.
Yes, I am on. I just had to unmute.
Terry, I asked, I'm a little late joining. Do we have all the commissioners online?
Let me check really quick.
Or if Ivan, if you know that.
I show 6. Am I missing someone?
There's Donna.
We're missing Kevin.
Okay.
I'm saying first names because everything goes in alphabetical order of first names on the list.
I think we're fine here.
Yeah, this is an emergency. We're all first names in this. In the file.
Apologize for the informality.
Okay, so let's give Kevin a few minutes to join us, if that's okay, Nagi.
Yes, please.
Okay, and then we'll do a little bit of a walk through the agenda. Before we do that, I think everyone's had a chance to sit down with Ivan and Ben and go through the logistics or the mechanics of working this out. I'm going to try to myself. I'll try to spend today. I will try to moderate, and tomorrow Nagi will be doing that as well. And what I'll try to do is make sure that as we have a discussion on each item, I'm going to make sure I turn to the commissioners and give you an opportunity to, raise your hand to speak up. Or if you notice on the top right, there's that looks like a little balloon, like where you can make a comment. And we'll try to keep track of the comments. So if you wanted to say, I want to speak up after this, or I have a question, you can put it in that comment area there. And we could do that. And pretty much, I think the way it works is the latest people to speak have their pictures shown up. And is how it is, if you're wondering why different people are showing up on the screen. And Jason just made a comment there as an example. And I hate to think what Jason might have put there, so I'm sure he was appropriate. I guess I'll just see if there's any questions before we go. And if anybody wants to ask any questions about the mechanics of how we're going to work here today.
No.
And I will pause a little longer than normal, but to give anyone a chance to speak up. Okay. Our intent here is to try to do this as much as possible the way we have done this in the past. And if you recall, in the past, we've sat around in a big square and we've had, the commissioners and our UDOT leadership team, the staff, sitting around intermingled with the commissioners. So those commissioners that, quote, represent a region would normally have the region director sitting next to them so that you guys could huddle or ask any questions. And so you could kind of do that as we do have the region directors on. So, if you wanted to kind of ask a question, you could use the chat box to ask a question as you go. And, you could say, if Nagi had a question for Rick, he could say, hey, Rick, what about this road down in Tokerville? What's going on there? And, so you could get that. All of us will hear, or all of us will see what you're typing. So I'm sure that's okay. But other than that, this is supposed to be informal. This is really we're summing up the entire year's effort. So we have gone every commission meeting. Near the end of the agenda, we have what we call the needs and condition reports. And we've had our different divisions that are responsible for programs and our regions all report to the commission in terms of this is what we've accomplished with the money you've assigned to these programs or projects. And these are what the needs that we see are going forward. And we've built those, kind of built that knowledge base up throughout the entire year. And the intent here is to kind of sum that all up and to show you, where we're going. And I think Ben is on the agenda to kind of talk through the year schedule, the cycle of life, I've called it in the past, because of course life revolves around transportation. But we'll show how this meeting fits into it. So this had typically been a full day meeting, and probably 6-7 years ago, our commissioner then, Chairman Jeff Holt, said that's too much. And I remember walking out, and we had a notebook this thick in front of each commissioner. And Jeff's approach to this is as we went through the book, he pulled the pages out, and he walked away, and there was a couple hundred pages spread all over where he was sitting. And he walked out with that all sitting on the table there. And so we decided to break it up really with March being about talking about the programs, and April being project specific. And so as much as possible, in light of the present circumstances that we find ourselves, we'd like to make this informal. We'd like to make this a meeting where any question is appropriate, and we can have a discussion around that. And I will, I think you saw the note there from Terry.
Yes.
We are live streaming this on YouTube, which is new, because what we have done in the past is we've live streamed the commission meetings because there's a certain amount of effort involved in people from our communication staff and getting all the equipment together to live stream. And the workshops were never thought to be something that we would live stream. Well, it tends to be a byproduct from our Google Meets software that we're using. So we said, why, if we can do it and it doesn't take additional effort, why not do that? So we are live streaming this. So I'm sure you're all going to be getting big fat contracts from companies. If you were to wear, if Jim were to wear a Nike shirt now, I'm sure Nike would be contacting you to sponsor you on the commission. With that, I don't have anything more. I don't know if Nagi, you'd like to share any thoughts at this point, or if any of the other commissioners have thoughts or questions they'd like to ask. I'll open that up for them right now.
I'd, we know that not to be outdone by Neil Diamond, and if the Beatles were here today from to do the Ed Sullivan show, this is what they would probably sing, okay? Oh, I tell you something, I think you'll understand. Oh, I tell you something, I just can't hold your hand.
Yay!
Oh, just can't hold your hand. Anyway, that's all I'm going to do. So just a little lively. If Neil Diamond can do it, the commission's going to have us talk to about not holding hands. So there we go. That's all
I
I'm
see a new entertainer for our Christmas lunch.
Yeah.
Oh, Natalie.
Oh,
Natalie, go. There we go. All right, we're ready.
Okay.
There went all the sponsorships out the door.
wow.
Okay, that's all I got to add.
Nagi, anything you'd like to share?
Well, no, I cannot be that kind of introduction. No, thank you very much. I don't have any other kind of talent.
All needed.
And what you'll see us doing during the meeting is we'll be kind of referring to Ivan, because Ivan is the man who's controlling the documents. We wanted to get that in one source. Ivan, would you share the agenda, and I'll just we could reference that a few minutes here before we go on. Okay. So what we have here, you can see I can consider that the welcome, and then just from agenda review, that the legislative update. I know some have said that I would do that. Linda and Becky will do that legislative update. So Linda will discuss the policy bills that took place during the session, and Becky will discuss the appropriations and the amount of money that we received. And then we'll step into the program recommendations, where Ben will go through the Stip development process, that cycle that we go through every year. And then Becky will provide us with, from the state funding side, how much the funding that's available for the commission to work with. And then Ivan will go through the federal side of it as well. And then we'll talk through those programming recommendations. And it's really, we have a 4-hour block. I'm imagining, I don't know this, that it may go quicker in this format than if we were face-to-face, but who knows? My goal is not to rush anything. It's to give you all the time you would like to dig as deep as you would like on any subject. And so we have a lot of folks from UDOT on, and any questions you have on anything, we will do our best to respond to those questions. So with that, if there's any questions on what we're trying to get done today, I'll open that up. No? Okay, I see a couple heads shaking, those that are on my screen. And oh, Kevin, you joined us. Thank you, Kevin.
So suddenly I see two Carlos, one for Jim Evans, one for Carlos. So how come?
I don't know.
I have a double vision this morning.
That's pretty scary if you have two of me.
Yeah, there's a Jim Evans and there's a Carlos. Carlos is speaking and Jim Evans is just moving them out. But you have both of them, both slots. So
I think it's Ivan's screen that we're seeing.
Yeah, so Ivan opened up a shared screen, and he's sharing a partial screen. Now he's sharing a full screen.
That's correct.
So I think that's probably a good lesson learned here. We should probably just share full screens, guys.
So when I share my screen on when you view it, on the left side, about 3/4 of your screen is dedicated to the view that my computer's showing. And on the rightmost side, you will still continue to see that the image of all the attendees, especially those that are speaking. Okay. So I actually don't see, the only thing that I see right now is the agenda page itself. On my screen, I do not see the list of attendees until I move my mouse over and go into the meeting. And now you probably see a double column of the attendees.
Yes.
So I will not be on this screen. I will try to stay shown here.
Okay.
Or the other presentations, just so you know, you will continue to see that list of the attendees on the right.
Okay, that makes sense. Nobody needs to see two Carloses. So with that, I'd like to see Linda. Are you online?
Yes, I am.
Well,
I'll even do my camera.
and what we'll do, okay. What I'd like to do is turn the time to Linda. And commissioners, I'm gonna get out of the meeting for a second, and I'm gonna move to another location so I could actually bring it up on my conference projector. And so I will get off and get on very quickly, okay?
So you want me to start? I think we just had another earthquake aftershock here at our house because my whole computer was shaking and I heard a rumble. So we'll see what that was. The legislative update. So did the legislators got the, commissioners got the complete legislative summary, I believe. So what I'm doing is in these slides, I was just picking out those issues that I thought would be of particular interest to the commissioners, but I'd be glad to answer a question on any bill that was on the complete list, but I'll just hit the highlights for the commissioners. So Ivan, if you could go to the next slide. The big one was the project prioritization. One thing I will say, I was very pleased what came out of the legislative session this year is that the legislature refrained from earmarking projects in the TIF. And I think that is testament to the legislature's ongoing commitment to the commission prioritization process. And I was very pleased that they stayed away from earmarking those funds. So it's honoring the commission's process to be able to use a data-driven process to identify the highest needs. So some of the big things that came out of the session this year is an SB 150. It was a bill by Senator Harper. And in there were a couple things that it told that the commission may give priority consideration when you're doing the TIF prioritization. So you could look at TIF and TTIF. You may give priority consideration to TTIF projects that support a TOD or a transit supportive development, that they're really trying to encourage local communities to look at transit-oriented development, development patterns that will support high-intensity transit, that you may give priority consideration to TIF and TTIF projects that support a transportation reinvestment zone with certain restrictions. So if the TRZ provides a benefit for the state, the commission could make that determination and say, well, this TRZ is beneficial for the state, so we can go ahead and give that priority consideration when we're thinking about which projects to prioritize. And then there was language in an appropriations bill, and I think we'll have more discussion about this going forward. It was just intent language urging the commission and UDOT to consider programming beyond the normal programming horizon. Of course, with everything that's going on right now with some of the financial uncertainty, we'll have to give that a lot more consideration moving forward. So Ivan, next screen.
I have to interrupt you for a second. I don't have any presentation of Ivan's at all on my screen, just a picture of him.
Oh. So should I cut out my camera, Ivan? Does that?
So I can go ahead and see it. Perhaps, Nagi, if you clicked on the left side in the big part of your screen, it might bring it back up.
Okay.
If that doesn't work, sometimes I click and I lost that screen. If
Okay.
you,
It came on. Jason, it came on. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so other issues that were outside of prioritization. So the commission, one of the issues is, the state law requires you to review all of UDOT rules, not approve them, but review them. The way the law was written is if we went in and changed a rule to add a comma, we would have to bring it back to you for consideration. So what we did is we added language to say that you would only reviews that substantively amend UDOT rules. So if it's just a technical correction, you're not going to have to hear a review of that rule. It's only if it's doing something that's substantive. SB 60, the legislature really got into this about the advice and consent of being able to appoint somebody to a board or a commission. And so all of the boards and commissions around the entire state were modified to clarify that it comes with the quote advice and consent of the Senate. It also put a lot more detailed information on any nominee that has to be sent to each senator and Ledge Research General Counsel at least 30 days in advance of a session to approve the appointment. So they wanted more information and more time to consider that information before they give consent to an appointment. And that was for everybody. It wasn't just the commission. SB 146, it included some provisions in there about conflict of interest for all boards and commissions across the entire state. I talked with Jim Palmer, our attorney. He thinks that what you have already done, declaring a conflict of interest, is sufficient, but we're going to continue to look at that and see as a commission whether you need to take any action to ensure that you comply with the new law. But right now we think you're okay. We'll let you know if there's anything additional that you need to do. And it also imposed new requirements when there's a vacancy in terms of a notification so many days in advance before that vacancy occurs. And then I just want to let you know, SB 25, they codified all the highway system changes that the commission made last year. Next one, Ivan. There was a lot that they did with the State Infrastructure Bank. They changed some of the provisions that we have for a SIB loan now. You can see here on the slide that it increased the repayment from 10 to 15 years. There was discussion about even going out to 20 years, but they finally settled on 15 years because that's consistent with the term of state-issued bonds, so they felt like that was a good time period. They said that loan rates can be no higher than 0.5% over the state bond rate. Right now, your rates vary from 0.5 to 1%, so now it's locked it in at 0.5. It expanded the eligibility for SIB loans to construct and improve any parking structure, not just those that support an intermodal regional transportation facility. So previously it was looking at structures that were supporting transit, and now it could be parking structures that would be for any kind of purpose. It expanded the SIB eligibility for a project that supports a local government economic development initiative, not just a local general plan. So it makes it a little less formal in terms of what types of local government projects it could support. It says that your commission prioritization rules may include consideration for projects that encourage, enhance, or create economic benefits for political subdivisions, not just economic benefits for the state. So again, you're not forced to do it, but you may include consideration. One thing I thought would be important to mention as part of the SIB is it repealed the $10 million SIB loan that was going to go to MIDA for the Jordanelle Parkway project. It was the $10 million loan that you had considered earlier, but there were some issues about repayment schedule. So what the legislature did instead is they repealed the authorization for the $10 million loan, and instead they made it a direct appropriation in $10 million in cash to MIDA for that project. So it's no longer going through the SIB. I will mention that the legislature did not capitalize the SIB beyond the amount of money that you currently have in there. So any kind of SIB loans that you do are still going to be subject to the availability of cash because the legislature didn't add any additional money to the SIB. Next slide, Ivan. This is a new program, and I just wanted to spend some time on it. Under the tax reform that the legislature adopted in December, they included a provision that removed the sales tax on the sale of fuel, including the sales tax on the sale of fuel for locomotives. When that bill was repealed by the legislature, this bill reinstates one provision from the tax reform bill so that it is removing the sales tax exemption for the sale of fuel that's sold for locomotives. That is going to generate about $3.5 million a year moving forward. They specifically said in the bill that any expenditures for that would be subject to legislative appropriation. So that money gets collected and it gets put within a restricted account within the TTIF. So because it's in that restricted account, you couldn't use it for just a TTIF project. It is only for a railroad crossing project. It's for railroad crossings on state or local roads. It was interesting that in the bill, they specifically said that expenditures are subject to legislative appropriation. That's redundant language because we can't spend any money that the legislature doesn't appropriate. So there was a point that they were making by specifically saying in the bill, expenditures are subject to legislative appropriation, which to me tells me that they anticipate that now and in the future that they will direct how those funds will be spent. That's why I say on the slide that I don't anticipate that UDOT or the commission will have any role prioritizing or directing the use of those funds. I believe that in the future, the legislature will direct the use of those funds, which is evident in the appropriations bill. There was intent language directing us to partner with Brigham City for a railroad crossing on Forest Street. This has been a concern for Brigham City for a number of years with a UP crossing. Because the funding doesn't take effect until January 1 of 2021, it only generates 1.5 million for the fiscal year rather than the whole 3.5 million. We intend to just transfer those funds over to Brigham City through an interlocal agreement with Brigham. It's a crossing on a local road, so we feel that it would be most appropriate to just transfer those funds to Brigham City and let them manage their own project. So we'll have an interlocal agreement that we'll put together later this year to do that. Any questions on that? Okay, Ivan, next slide. And then I was just going to highlight some other issues that might be of interest to the Commission on toll revenue. SB 150 expanded the eligible uses of toll revenue to any, quote, state transportation purpose. State transportation purpose is defined in state code. It has a very broad use. Currently, the code said that toll revenue could only be used for the tollway that was being served by the toll revenues or the facilities that support it. By saying it could be used for any state transportation purpose, it could expand it to other roads, it could expand it to transit, it could expand it to pedestrian facilities. Of course, federal restrictions still apply. So if we generate toll revenue on I-15, you first have to demonstrate that you have met all of the needs of I-15 before any excess revenues could be used for anything else. But it does give the state more flexibility about how toll revenues could be used in the future. On the road usage charge program, the legislature is still really committed to the RUC program. They directed us by June of 2021 to come up with a plan to enroll everybody registered in the state in the RUC program within 10 years. So we'll be coming up with a plan about how to make that occur. On electric vehicle charging stations, there were 3 different bills that dealt with planning and deploying EV charging network. So UDOT is going to be working very closely with other entities to develop an EV charging network, not just planning it, but actually helping to deploy it. We'll be working with all of the state agencies, interested groups. There was one bill that was specifically about rural electric cooperatives to get something into the rural areas. Rocky Mountain had a really big bill. They anticipate $50 million that they're going to be investing for an EV charging network. So we'll be coordinating with all those entities in the coming year. And then transit, I just want to mention there's continued support for transit at the legislature. They provided funding for a Frontrunner strategic business plan. I'll go into that a little bit more later. And then also they provided funding for the Point of the Mountain with the transit alternatives down there and the environmental analysis. And I can go into that later when we review how much money was set aside for that. And that's all I was going to highlight for the legislative outcome, unless you had some specific questions.
Linda?
Yes.
I noticed that Lou had 2 questions in the chat bar, and I don't know if he wants to speak to those or if he wants me to read them.
Please go read them. Linda, thank you so much. I just 2 questions on updates. So Carlos, please read them. You'd read them much better than I would.
Oh, sure, I would. So it's first one, Linda, excellent report, thanks. What impact will Senate Bill 133 about public-private partnerships have on infrastructure investment opportunities?
Great question, Lou. So this was something that came from Senator Hemmert. He was not aware, actually, that UDOT has P3 rules in place, and that Lyle McMillan is in charge of, facilitating that. But he felt that the state needed like a one-stop shop, a facilitator that will be hired in GoEd to essentially market P3s, to provide a one-stop shop for someone who's interested in a P3 for any kind of infrastructure or any kind of use, that they would have one person to go to talk about P3 opportunities. We got language in the bill that specifically says, because this facilitator is there, UDOT can still talk with other entities about P3s. Other entities can still come and talk to us to talk about a P3, that we don't have to just funnel everything through the facilitator. But obviously, if there are P3 opportunities that come along, that we will advise GoEd about it and we'll coordinate with them. The legislature was a little bit worried about creating a new position within GoEd for P3s. So they put a sunset on the provision. 2024, I think, is what the sunset was. And at that point, they would revisit whether it's beneficial for the state to have a P3 facilitator. I anticipate that next year, the legislature may consider a bill that puts a little bit more meat on the bones of what P3 in the state should look like. Senator Hemmert was not aware that UDOT already had pretty extensive rules in place for P3s. So I think our rules will be a basis for them to think about what legislation might look like next year.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it. I saw you up there so many times working so hard. So you're our hero. Thank you for that.
Lou, Linda goes up there the first day of the session. She doesn't even come to the office anytime in between. And with the virus, she's yet to come back to the office.
Yeah,
I might have to send her a map on how to get here.
Yeah.
Well,
Lou, another point here is Linda mentioned the department had rules for P3s, for public-private partnerships, for solicited as well as unsolicited, but the commission also has rules. You were given rulemaking authority. And so those have been in place probably for 5-6 years now. And so your question was, do we think it'll bring more opportunities, this bill? I don't think it will for transportation. It might bring more visibilities for more opportunities throughout the state for infrastructure, but it doesn't really change anything for UDOT.
Good. Thank you. And I had a second question too.
Yes, your second question. Linda, please remind us how UDOT will be impacted by legislative changes on inland port.
So on the inland port, they did make some changes in that. There was a lot of controversy from the local entities, especially Salt Lake City, how much influence that they had with the Inland Port Board. So the legislature did remove the executive director of UDOT from that board. So Carlos no longer has to attend those meetings. And instead, they're just putting a lot more local influence on the board, changes in how the taxes generated within the port can be used, who makes the decisions about how that money will be used. UDOT will continue to have a coordination role with the inland port in terms of any kind of transportation improvements. Brian says a 3.3 aftershock.
Wow.
So we're going to continue to have that coordination role with the port, but we no longer have an actual representative on the board. If that answers your question.
It does. It's their loss not having Carlos there, but it's our gain that he can be working on everything else. Thanks for that update.
Sure.
I just want to, hi, it's Donna. I just want to add to Lou's compliment of Linda's work up there. I thought I put in a lot of time until I see Linda. She's usually there before I leave or before I get there and after I leave. So I just want to, we're very well represented.
Well, thank you. I have to admit that part of the reason I get there so early in the morning is because I want to make sure I get a good parking spot. So it's pretty selfish purposes. And that was it.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Linda?
Good job.
Thank you.
And nice job. So are we going to go to Becky at this point, or we wait to, or is that happening in the after the funding overview? Remind me, Ivan.
We're going to have Ben introduce the STIP cycle, and then we will,
Thank you.
after he does the introduction, then we'll turn it over to Becky.
Thank you. Ben.
Thank you, Carlos. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, this is Ben Hewitt from UDOT Program Development, and I'm going to go through the STIP workshop portion of this agenda right now. So I'll just do a quick re-review of the agenda piece here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about process, and then hand it off to Becky Bradshaw. She'll talk through funding, and then she'll hand it off to Ivan Hartle, and he'll talk about allocations and distributions with some information on federal funding and our program fund recommendations. And then Terry Newell will talk about the transportation investment funds and the transit transportation investment funds at the end. So Ivan, if you will navigate to the UDOT website and scroll down to the Transportation Commission link, and then scroll down to the middle portion there, so you can see here where it talks about active STIP and the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP. So just at a high level, just a reminder, refresher, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program it's a multi-year work plan for transportation projects. So then if you click on the process link right there, this slide here, we typically always want to start with this. This is a good refresher of an excerpt from Utah Code 721303 that highlights the duties of the commission. And there's a couple of duties that are highlighted there that are applicable to this STIP workshop. And the first one there is that the commission determines priorities and funding levels for state transportation systems. And so that's definitely applicable to what this STIP workshop and the process forward is all about. And then the second one that's highlighted talks about public hearings and providing for public input. So as I go through this overview, you'll notice that the process that we work through is systematic, and we do it in a way that we can do them at the commission meetings and provide for that public input and meet that public hearing requirement. So then, Ivan, if you would click on the STIP yearly calendar. So we've referenced this a couple times. We modified this a little bit last year at the STIP workshop, and then we've kept improving it as we go. But what this calendar represents is the annual cycle that we do to develop the STIP, and shows all the steps that we have to do. And so if I start working from the left side of this calendar in September, you'll see at the bottom that there are what we call accomplishments, conditions, and needs reports. And so there's some links there. The one with aeronautics and public transit is the first one. And then as you work to the right, this shows all of the presentations that were done at the commission meetings for these programs that help set the stage. They talk about their accomplishments, conditions. They address some of their measures that they use. And then that helps develop what the needs are that can result in a funding recommendation. So that's what shows there from September through February. And then around the February timeframe, looking at the top, that's typically when the regions have their individual STIP workshops to kind of gather up their needs and discuss, developing recommendations for their specific programs that they're involved in. And then that brings us to March, where we are right now, and this is our part 1 of the STIP workshop. And this is where we go over those program level funding recommendations. So we don't get into specific projects, but we try to take all the stuff that's been presented up to this point and develop recommendations for funding categories in all the programs. And the way that typically works is whenever we present a recommendation, it is accompanied with a request for approval the following month. So if we talk about programs this month, then we would request approval from the commission of those program values next month, which gives the opportunity for discussion, public input, and any needed modifications before that requested approval. So then working into April, that's when, like I mentioned, we would request approval of the program values, and that would be at the commission meeting, but the STIP workshop piece in April is focused on projects. So that's where now we can talk about specific projects within certain programs that the commission, that can be presented to the commission and develop recommendations. And there again, that would be accompanied by a request for approval in following commission, in a following commission meetings or in commission meetings following that. So then working from May through the October period, there's some other activities, and I'll just kind of high level go through those. There's compiling all of those recommendations and actions and approvals and developing a draft STIP that then could be published and allow for a public comment period as shown there it's shown there in the July time period. And then there's a commission action after the public comments are taken and addressed and presented, asking for approval to then submit the STIP to the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration as applicable, so that they can do a review in September and then have an approval by October. And then the last thing that I'll mention there is if you kind of look at the bottom, we've listed some little markers for the respective fiscal years, the state fiscal year and the federal fiscal year. So this whole STIP process lines up with the federal fiscal year to meet the federal requirements. So that is a high-level process overview, mainly focused on this calendar. There are some links on there for some of those needs and conditions reports if people want to look back at some of those at any point in time. We've tried to make this so that you can get the information if you need it. With that, I would open it up to any questions or comments before I pass it along to Becky.
Ben, on the section you had a code for the commission responsibility. You had A and C. Where is B? Is it more than we can handle?
No, what we did here is just pulled out the ones that are applicable to the STIP workshop, but B talks about additions and deletions to the state. There's actually A through J in that duties column. But the purpose of this was to pull out the ones that were related to STIP workshop. Some of the other ones are additions and deletions to the state highways and making policies and rules and approving settlement agreements and of condemnation cases. So the link down that Ivan's pointing to shows the full code, but these ones were just meant to show the ones that are applicable to this STIP process. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ben? This is about process. Okay. Becky, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good morning. I have 9 slides in my presentation. I will be showing the different types of funding that was appropriated to us during this year's session. The first slide represents our transportation fund. There we go. The transportation fund is where we get our funding for our day-to-day operations. On the left side of the screen shows the consensus revenue estimates for fiscal year 2020, which is about $688 million. 82% of these funds comes from motor fuel and special fuel, 8% motor vehicle registration fees, and 10% permit fees. Ivan, can you go back one slide? Sorry. On the right side of this slide shows the appropriated budget. What that means is this is how the legislature appropriated the funding to us in our line items. The programs in black represents our 6 line items. The red represents the funds that will be transferred out. Of course, 30% of our revenue that comes in this fund is transferred to the B&C roads, 47.7 million to our transportation investment fund, and again, the 13 million that goes out to other agencies. The construction line item, which changed, the name is now Highway Systems Construction, and that 155 million is what the commission will have to program this year. Is there any questions so far on this?
Becky, good morning. What are the other agencies? Can we name a few of them for our commission purpose, please?
Yes, these are actually in code, and we've been doing this since as long as I can remember, but 5.4 million goes to UHP, Public Safety, 450,000 to the Division of Finance. You know, they are processing a lot of payments for us, and this helps them out a little bit. 5.8 million to the Tax Commission. They do collect all of our revenue for us. And then 118,000 goes to the Department of Community and Economic Development, Travel Council.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Becky, I have a question.
Okay.
The work that's planned up at Bear Lake for the marina and the new access road to the marina to take the load off 89, which are those funds represented here in one of these categories?
Wayne, this is Carlos. No, they're not. That was that money that the commission program came out of. If you recall, there was the $1 billion bond that the legislature authorized, and out of that there was the $100 million recreational program to address congestion on state roads. So that came out of that bond's being paid back by the Transportation Investment Fund.
Thank you, Carlos.
Okay. The next slide basically just shows the percentages in each category for revenue and the appropriated budget. As you can see that in our appropriated budget, 30% to B&C, 25% is spent in our operations line item, and 22% for highway construction. The next slide
Becky, hold on. I'm just wondering, do the commissioners have any questions about any of those line items, about what goes on in there?
What categorizes in the spatial fuel?
Diesel.
Okay.
Diesel and sorry, what was those other small ones, Carlos?
Oh, I think you got the next.
CNG is one of them.
Yes.
Okay.
Any kind of alternate fuel would fall under special fuel.
It's probably 98, 99% diesel.
Okay.
Okay, Becky.
Okay. So the next slide just shows a brief history of our motor fuel. You can see in 2015 to 16, there was an increase, and this was due to House Bill 362. It was passed in the 2015 general session. It increased the gas tax from 24.5 cents per gallon to 29. And then in 2017, they tied the gas tax to the CPI. So you'll see another increase there. So the price per gallon is 30 cents per gallon in 2019 and expected to go up again next year.
Becky, hold on this slide for a second.
Okay.
One of the most amazingly consistent relationships, if you look at the GDP, gross domestic product of this country, and you graph that on top of the vehicle miles traveled. So that's VMT, you'll hear that term sometimes. That's kind of a surrogate for mobility. But if you look at the relationship, it's amazing. So as our economy does well, there's more travel. So travel actually helps our economy. Mobility is important for our economy. And if you see the drop that took place during the Great Recession back there in 2007, 2008, part of what Linda alluded to in her comments, part of what we need to manage, and we'll manage that, out of Becky's shop, is, are we going to see a drop so that we have a consensus revenue projections that really that took place prior to, I think, a full appreciation of the impact of the current situation on the economy. And so we have this consensus revenue projection, and it's for everything. It's for sales taxes, for gas taxes. And I fully expect, if the economy continues to turn down, we're going to see a decrease in the revenues. So even though they appropriate a number, we're responsible to manage to what actually comes in. That's that's something that Becky loses sleep over.
Yeah, I was looking at that last night, and last year at this time, we had already received 70% of our total revenue coming in for the transportation fund. And comparing it to our 2020, we are only like 2% below. I mean, we're really running, we're on track right now. So.
Yeah, we're close, and I think I don't think we're still realizing the potential impacts.
Correct.
Maybe this stimulus package, or maybe we're not supposed to call it that. Maybe the stimulus package is going to help bridge us through this, and we're going to have a softer landing, and we'll be able to take back off. I don't know. So we're going to be watching that carefully.
Is this going to go impact our existing project already bid out, or the future projects, or combination?
It could have the revenues, the way the revenues come in. You've programmed a lot of projects for 20 and 21 already,
right?
And so we're going to have to manage that program. Projects you've picked, we're responsible to manage it based on revenues that come in. So the answer is I don't know. It could, may not.
What if you decided to postpone few? In that case, then you have to have a penalty with the contractors, or this COVID-19 has provision in it for.
We are not proposing to postpone, it's amazing. I'm getting a flurry of text messages from other DOT directors right now. It's been going on because no other state has shut down projects. I just got a text from the Secretary of Washington. They just suspended their construction program.
Oh.
That's going to cost him $3 million a day in delay costs.
Well, yeah.
We do not. The governor does not want to slow down or shut down our construction program. Too much of our economy is supported with the close to 15,000 contract employees that we have working with us on this. So, and then all the cascading for the suppliers and such. So,
hey, Carlos, I would like to weigh in there. You hearing me okay? Give me a thumbs up.
I see the thumb.
Okay, good. I'm in a lot of discussions because of the work I've been doing on the economy about critical industries in our state as increased public health measures go in place. And in every one of those discussions, construction is held as a critical industry and would not be affected. So that could always change, but I thought I'd report that.
Yep. Thank you, Natalie. That's the message we're sending to our contractors and consultants and our employees as well.
Good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. Becky?
Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, which is our Transportation Investment Fund. These funds will be programmed, and some of them have already been programmed for highway capacity projects. The left side shows our 4 sales tax earmarks, motor vehicle registration fees, and the 47.7 million of motor fuel that is transferred to this fund from the Transportation Fund. 366 million of this will be set aside to service the debt, and the remaining will be for projects. Pretty simple fund, right? The next slide just shows you the percentages. 82% of this fund does come from sales tax, and 46% of those funds will be spent to service the debt.
So the commission has programmed this revenue source out through 2024 and a little bit of 25. And so that's one of the discussions we're going to have. Terry will talk a little bit about that later on in this agenda.
So, Commissioner Gardner, your agency, your KMC Gardner Institute, has their projection for decreased tourism and challenges with that revenue yet?
I don't know if Natalie heard you.
She off?
There she is. Natalie, Nagi had a question. Nagi, you want to repeat your question?
Yeah.
This KMC Gardner Institute, have any projection yet decreased based on the decreased visitors and tourism due to COVID-19 and what is going to be impacting to economy with state and local agencies?
Yeah. You know, the way I respond to that is we're in an urgent phase right now that's requiring all hands on deck just to keep the right decisions flowing. There won't be any analysis on what the economic impacts are for some time.
Okay.
Right now, the greater part of the discussion is what do you do to give businesses the assurance that aid is on its way? And, you know, the Senate passed the stimulus bill last night. There will be, you know, I believe, block grants to states, and it will help with a lot of these things. I think we would look to Senator Romney and Senator Lee for their guidance on that stimulus.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Carlos, it might be mentioning that the governor did release the state plan, and maybe that'd be something to send to the commissioners.
Yeah, Natalie, that's a great idea. And we'll make a point to pull that off the website and provide the commissioners with a link to that 3-phase plan. Natalie did a great job presenting the meat of that a couple days ago.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Thank you, Ivan. So our bond authorizations. So we have 3 separate bond authorizations that we've been issuing bonds from. In February, we issued the last of our old $2 billion bond authorization. You may recall from the 2019 general session, we were instructed to use the remaining 62 million bond authorization for various projects. We issued 477 million this last February, and we plan to use the remaining bond authorization next February. The 87.7 million and the 89 million from the new bond authorization from this year's session.
These will be needed for projects you've already programmed.
And that will be it. The next February will be our last bond issuance. The next slide. So during this year's legislative session, we were appropriated about $9.8 million of general funds to be spent on these specific programs. I'm going to ask if Linda wants to take this slide for me, since she has all the background and what these funds were for and to be used for. Linda, are you still here?
I am.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the coordinated mobility funding, that's just an ongoing 2019 earmark for cost to manage a website and software for UTA program. It coordinates mobility options across the state. especially for disadvantaged persons. So what the program does is it ensures that people can find and coordinate existing transportation services. It's not just transit, but also services such as Uber or Lyft. And then the next one, the UTA, again, this is another UTA project. It's ongoing funding to construct a facility for their clean fuel fleet. The technical planning assistance, this should sound familiar to legislators. This is to commissioners. This is ongoing funding for the program that was authorized last year. This is the program that UDOT administers to partner statewide with local communities and MPOs for local land use and transportation planning assistance. The next one, the rural.
Yeah, hold on. Natalie, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I am?
No, Natalie.
Oh.
I saw her lips moving. Natalie, did you have something to say? Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, so the rural electric vehicle, setting.
Okay.
So I'll just kind of keep going.
Yes.
On the rural electric vehicle.
Sorry about that, Carlos. I'm just going to have to rejoin in like 3 minutes. I'm getting this unstable connection. So give me 3 minutes. I'll be back on.
Gotcha. Thank you, Natalie.
Do you want me to keep going, Carlos?
Yes, go ahead, Linda.
Okay. So the EV charging infrastructure, that's a new one. So what this did is it provides matching grants for electric vehicle charging infrastructure in rural Utah. Some is going to be on highways, national and state parks, other rural areas of the state. The Utah Rural Electric Cooperatives Association worked this in the legislative session. They came and talked with me, I think it was 2 or 3 days before the session ended, about what their effort was. So UDOT will coordinate with the Electric Cooperatives Association to develop a plan that will be presented to our Legislative Appropriations Committee later this year. So talking with the representative from the Electric Cooperatives Association, they've already put a lot of thought into how this plan could work. So UDOT will work with them and see what we can do to help identify EV charging infrastructure in rural areas. So that'll be cool. Next one, Cottonwood Canyon congestion mitigation. This was an earmark for the Central Wasatch Commission. It's going to partner with local governments to contract with the Highway Patrol or other police departments to pay for the cost of providing support for UTA buses to avoid traffic congestion in the Cottonwood Canyons. Is there anything more you wanted to add on that, Carlos?
Well, this was basically sold as a way to pay overtime for Unified Police to escort the buses to the head of the line when the canyons are closed. So if people see the buses getting escorted to the head of the line, there might be more motivation for people to get on the buses.
Okay.
This wasn't something we asked for.
Right. So Point of the Mountain. So I'll talk about this 250 earmark, but also another 750 earmark that's on a different slide. So this $250,000 earmark from general funds is funding that's needed to complete the existing Point of the Mountain alternatives analysis. It's looking to define potential transit improvements that can support the Point of the Mountain development. It was another $250,000 that was needed to finish that. So that will complete that out. We'll see on another slide that there was also an additional $750,000 that the legislature earmarked out of the TTIF. Those funds would go only if revenues are available in the TTIF, and that other $750,000 is contingent on matching funds from other entities coming into it. They didn't want the state just to pay the whole thing. That money would be used to start the environmental analysis for whatever potential alternatives are identified out of the alternatives analysis. So it was a total of $1 million that's earmarked for Point of the Mountain, with 250,000 in general funds and up to another 750 out of the TTIF, but only if other entities come to the table with money to help pay for the cost of starting that environmental analysis. This was, flight services. Yeah, this was, so $2 million. This came from the governor urged the legislature to replace the state's 2 aging state planes due to increased cost to maintain the planes, which was affecting the availability of state planes to meet statewide needs. The Infrastructure and General Government Appropriations Committee recommended funding to replace at least 1 plane. But the final bill ended up providing $2 million to UDOT to, quote, acquire flight services. So we're going to continue to work to figure out how these funds could be used. Before the fiscal year ends, we're going to have a new governor in place, and I think that will influence what we're going to end up doing with those funds. But we'll continue working on that.
Well, Linda, you're more politically aware than I am. I think before the end of this fiscal year, we'll have an idea. We'll know who the Republican nominee is for governor.
Right. True. I'm sorry. I was talking about FY21, not FY20.
Oh, I thought you meant this current fiscal year.
No. When I say fiscal year, I mean the general funds are for FY21. Sorry.
Okay. No.
So in the past, we had requested a helicopter for Region 4. Is it out of question now?
Yeah, Nagi, that got squashed right away. Sorry, Rick.
Sorry, Rick. I tried. Go ahead, please.
Strategic business plan for future improvements to Frontrunner. I think this was a very important thing for the legislature to ensure that we got funded. This was something that UTA and UDOT have been talking for a while. So what this does is it provides funding needed to develop a strategic business investment plan for Frontrunner. UDOT will use these funds in cooperation with UTA, the MPOs, and relevant communities. So the plan will consider strategic double tracking Frontrunner commuter rail to increase frequencies and decrease travel times. In addition to double tracking, it's going to look at other improvements that would be needed. So current track configurations don't allow for increased number of trains to improve the headways due to the need for trains to pass at locations where only 1 track exists. So this plan is just going to identify incremental cost-effective investments to improve the service on Frontrunner. The thought is if we can improve service on Frontrunner, that it will attract more people to ride transit and take some of the demand on the highway and shift it over to transit. So this will be an important plan that everyone will put together. Amusement rights safety program. This just provides, if you remember in 2019, the legislature created a new regulatory oversight program for amusement rights safety that has been housed in UDOT. So those funds that you see there, that's just the money that we needed to be able to continue to administer that program for the FY21 year. The intent is that when the program takes effect, that fees would completely support the program, the same way that the Ropeway Committee is supported through fees. But this just appropriates money that we need to support the program until it's up and running. And the motorcycle safety awareness, there's a special license plate for motorcycle safety awareness. This just appropriates the funds that will come in from that license plate program. That's it on that one. Ivan, if you'd switch. Next slide. So this is the Transportation Investment Fund. So if you remember, there was $10 million that MIDA was seeking from, I'm going to jump down to the Jordanelle one first, the $10 million for the Jordanelle Parkway. So I think I already explained that the legislature provided a $10 million direct appropriation for that. So that's what's reflected here, is it was a direct $10 million appropriation instead of the SIB loan. The $20 million above it is for funding that we will provide to GOED that will go to MIDA. This is related to the 1800 North project in Davis County. MIDA intends to tear down the rail structure that's currently there, be able to do some environmental cleanup of that property, and it will all be used as part of a land exchange with UDOT to be able to do the 1800 North project. Our original intent was just to transfer cash, but felt this was a better way to go, so it's bond proceeds that will go to GoEd, who will then provide it to MIDA. It's not new. The TIF, I talked about that $750,000 that's going to the point of the mountain. That's intended to start the environmental analysis with other funds from other entities. And then the legislature appropriated $6 million to go to the Ogden Airport for some improvements at the Ogden Airport. Remember, there was previously, the legislature appropriated money to go to Provo Airport last year, so this is Ogden Airport this year. And then what you see there is that Brigham City for the rail crossing on 4th Street. This is what I talked about. This takes the money that's going to be generated in FY21, and we'll be able to transfer those funds to Brigham City through an interlocal agreement. That's that on that one. Let me make
Linda,
sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
With these monies up here in the TIF transferred to the 1800 North project up there, do we have other funds that are planned to support that project?
Commissioner, you've already programmed that project. Lisa, are you on? How much money has the commission programmed to that? Lisa? Unmute,
Sorry, I am on.
unmute yourself.
It's the unmuting that's the problem.
I'm pretty sure we have 90 million funded on that project right now.
So with what we've put into it, plus what this is, we won't have to add any funds to that, right? I saw that. You're teeny tiny on my screen, Carlos, but okay. All right. Thank you.
I see that Rick Torgerson asked whether these are one-time fund allocations, whether they're ongoing. It's a combination. Some of these are ongoing allocations, but most of this is just one time. And we can break down that one time and ongoing, but most of these are just one time. And
Go ahead, Linda.
I think that was it in terms of what I was going to review for appropriations.
So let's just stop for a second and see if any of the other commissioners have any or anyone from UDOT, if anyone has questions on this.
Linda, this is Jim Evans. Can I ask a question? Is that Jordanelle Parkway project, the one up there by Mayflower, kind of?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Rob's been working closely with them on that project. And in fact, if you recall, we came to the commission a couple months ago asking for some funds because we wanted to be able to add money to that. They're building those 2 portals underneath 40 as they built that bridge to build it wide enough, because one of the projects we have on our list in the future is to build a passing lane going uphill there.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to make sure as they do those portals that the bridge was wide enough to accommodate the future uphill lane.
Thank you.
Bob, if I said anything correct there or you want to add to it, jump in.
Can I go back to the Ogden Airport?
Yes.
Given the funds are transferred from the TTIF, does that then, are we talking about the fact that it's a transit related project?
No, it is not
Okay.
transit related. That's going back to there was some misunderstanding, or there was some confusion about how much general fund was actually going to be available to go into the TTIF, and revenue estimates were adjusted at one point, and so early in the session, the money that was appropriated to the TTIF didn't reflect the increased revenue that we were anticipating to come into the TTIF. And so that money was kind of grabbed and went to the Ogden Airport before the realization came around that, oh, that was increased revenue coming to the TTIF.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this goes back to Natalie's question, or the question that was asked of Natalie. Do you anticipate, we still have 3 months before the end of this fiscal year, let alone starting next year, with the decline in economic activity right now? Do we anticipate any budget cuts for the current year that affects any of these kind of one-time things, maybe as we look to the next year?
We're not anticipating any cuts as of today. It's just a little too early right now to tell, but not for this fiscal year.
Okay, thanks.
Carlos, did you want to add to that?
I think the legislature has already started looking at what options might be available for next fiscal year. But again, it's really early in this, and people are still trying to get an idea. Is this a short term? Is this going to be more extended? And so it's really hard to plan when we don't have a good vision of where this might be going.
Well, that wraps up my presentation. If anybody else has any questions.
Any more questions on money? Kevin, I can't hear you. Your microphone isn't working.
Hey, Carlos, I'll just report that I'm back in, and sorry about that missing, but I'll review the slides online.
Thank you, Natalie.
Okay.
We're trying to see if I know Kevin has something to say, and he's just trying to get his microphone to work. Jordan, do you have any advice for him?
We were seeing the same issue with Kevin's microphone the other day when we did our testing. Are you calling in, Kevin, or? I don't think he's hearing us at all. Ivan, did we have his phone number?
I have.
I'll text it to you, Jordan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'll try and get a hold of him.
Okay. Thank you, Jordan. Okay, so any other questions or comments people have on the money side of things? Ivan, can we go back? You're probably still texting Jordan, but can we go back to the agenda real quick just so we can see where we're at in the agenda? There we are. Thank you. And so we just went through the funding overview with that commission summary. So now we're going to be going into the programming side of things and talking about the funding. And I think, Ivan, you were going to take it from here. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, we'll step into this and we'll go back once Kevin gets audio back. We'll go back to see what his question was on that, if it's okay, Nagi.
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's, Ivan, time's yours.
Okay, thank you. Going back to, we'll just stay on the Transportation Commission webpage here. The same link that Ben talked about earlier has this process link and this program. Right now, this program is still pointing towards last year's commission or last year's STIP workshop. When we conclude today, we will update this program to the new funding flow, the new program app. Right now, I'm going to go into the process and back to this application that Ben talked about earlier. And the first thing we're going to talk about is this STIP programming schedule. This does not detail every program, and many of our programs are aggregated together. For example, right here under pavement, in pavement we have a high volume pavement, or high volume roads, low volume roads, a pavement reconstruction program, and a statewide pavement management component. So that's where that 4 different programs are located. So we tried to go through and just give an idea of each one of these programs. Have they already been or previously been approved, which is the blue from our legend over here, or do we need to? Are we requesting action and requesting approval? And you'll be able to see in which year are we trying to take action for these programs. The easiest way, or the simplest way to look at this, is essentially anything with state money that we're trying to approve, with the exception of the TIF that has been previously reviewed and approved, is a next year approval. So the contingency funds, the transportation, the traffic management, the state pavement management component of pavement, and then within these programs, the traffic and safety and structures that also have a state dollar amount included, we need to take action on those as well. One other thing to call out on the structures component, we received additional one-time funding from federal highways back in the end of January, and it was $9 million that was directed to go towards structures. And so this year you'll see that $9 million increase in structures when we move to the programming. This is just, again, just kind of help us orient on the programs themselves and the actions that we're going to be looking for. Below the programming schedule, we have the Stip program. And so if I take this option here, it's going to pull up a page. And we'll zoom in just a second, but just to give us an overview of what this is showing us, we have 3 years across the top, the 21, 22, and 23. And we have 2 pages within each one. We have the funding flow, which is what we're looking at here, and an allocations page that takes us to a little finer detail, a little lower grain. And we'll talk about that one in just a second. And I'm going to zoom in and attempt to slide around a little bit on our page, just to make it easier as we're reviewing. So the first thing that we do is we take our total funding approach of how much money we receive from which funding type. We have our highway federal funds and the transportation fund construction line item that Becky discussed earlier. From her presentation, we're able to see that we have this $181 million that comes to the construction line item for our construction projects. And then we have our transportation investment fund. Located within this transportation fund, investment fund, is both the highway capacity and the transit capacity program. And we'll see that in just a second. After we receive our total dollar amounts, we need to make some adjustments. The largest adjustment we make is the federal, and the federal is this $82.5 million pass-through. And those pass-throughs, the majority of those end up going to the MPOs. This is the federal money that they receive. And I'm sorry, I'm going to back up for just a second. Our highway federal funds, we are looking at 2021 in the federal program. The FAST Act ends in 2020. So the federal amounts that you'll see in the 21, 22, and 23, we took the last year of the FAST Act and we just forecasted those flat. The only difference that's detailed here is our highway federal funds, the one-time money that we received back in January. We're adding up to the 2021 program so the commission can review it, and that will be included in our program values as we move forward. Otherwise, our highway federal funds are the last year of the FAST Act forecasted flat. Okay. The transportation fund is also forecasted off of this year, and it's forecasted with a 1.5% increase in 22 and then again in 23. The transportation investment fund, that's a specific fund that includes some of the bonding values that Becky talked about earlier. So this program, there's more fluctuation in these next couple of years, and we'll be able to see that. So back to this federal pass-through, this is the amount of money that we received in 2020 to pass through to the MPOs going forward. So it will change. We anticipate it to change when we receive a future bill, but just so you know where we're pulling these values. Okay, so the other adjustment that we need to make with our federal amount is we need to take state dollars and match to the federal dollars for our program. And that's what this $22.4 million reflects. So we take our state dollars out of this stack within the bar, and we're adding it to our federal program. So when we say we have $1 of federal to work with, that dollar has a portion of state and a portion of federal. So if I add 22.4 to my federal program, I also need to remove 22.4 from my state transportation fund. Historically, we've had a reserve amount, our comptroller's reserve, in coordination with the comptroller's office and with Becky. This year in 2021, we will not be holding back a comptroller's reserve, but you will see in 22 and 23, we are showing a $5 million comptroller's reserve. In the previous year, we had some additional legislative directed items that reduced our transportation fund construction line item. This year, we do not have any, so we do not have that reduction as well. So after those adjustments, we get to our program funding, and this is the amount of money that UDOT has to program in these three programs. So moving to the right and across, in the blue we continue to see our highway federal funds, and the programs that we're requesting or proposing that we fund out of the highway federal amounts. And then these three down here, the freight, transportation alternatives, and planning and research, these are mandated amounts through the bill. Again, this reflects the 2020 value of the FAST Act. If that requirement changes in the future, we will be bringing that back to the commission. But as of right now, if we were just reflecting from the 2020 FAST Act last year, we have freight, the federal requirement of freight is 13.9, transportation alternatives is 2.8, and then 7.2 for the planning and research. Then from the highway federal funds, we look at the transportation fund, the construction line item values, the programs that we're proposing to support with the values, with the associated values from the transportation fund, and then the transportation investment fund, and where we are proposing values here. In the transportation investment fund, we have our TIF highway capacity, and we also have this high volume roads. This is the TIF preservation that we take some of our transportation investment fund and we include it in our high volume roads, and we're looking for specific projects that are that were funded with TIF dollars or in the TIF capacity, I'll say envelope, but those projects that qualify for TIF dollars, and we preserve, or we use this $9 million in 2021 for that high volume. Yes, sir.
Sorry, this is Carlos. So the code says that roads built with transportation investment funds can be maintained and operated out of the TIF fund. So every year, based on those roads that have been built previously with TIF, our asset management team determines what value of money, what investments need to be made to preserve those roads. So when the TIF was created at the legislature, one of the concerns that always comes up is, are we going to just fund the capital program, and how are you going to maintain these roads going forward? So this was the legislative answer to that, and that's the money that Ivan's talking about here. Thank you, Ivan.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next item, as we continue to move to the right, you'll notice the program summary, and so some of our programs are listed in multiple funding categories. For example, we have traffic and safety at $25.25 million of highway federal, and then also traffic and safety at $17.03 million out of our state dollars, which gives us a total of traffic and safety off to the right. Same thing with our transportation solutions and our structures program, that it gets funded by multiple sources. And then the high volume roads here with the high volume roads down in the Transportation Investment Fund. This graphic here just shows from the item above, what's the percentage makeup of each one of those funds based on the fund type, just so you can get an understanding of if we look at transportation alternatives, what type of money is used. It is 100% federal. Okay. Are there any questions before we move to the allocations page? Are there any questions on the funding flow?
I do have a question, Ivan, please.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned early on that you have 9 million Fed fund coming to us. Does it have any expiration date on that?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
The 9 million Fed fund that you said that comes just recently on October, they gave it to us. Does that money have an expiration?
It has a 3-year expiration.
Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Sorry, I stepped away for a minute. Can I ask if, Kevin, are you back on audio?
I think his microphone was muted.
It's muted now.
Yes, I am. Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Great, thank you. And I think we all saw in the chat box, I think you were, not a question, but it was a point you were making.
Right. One question I do have, since I'm on, can you define what goes into the freight section? What is that made up of?
The federal freight program is specifically called out. The program, Utah has listed out specific roads that are that are designated to receive this.
They have to be projects on the national freight system.
All right. Thank you.
And we bring those projects to the commission on this national freight system for your approval. But the idea here, this is the first time this program was created under the FAST Act, it was deemed one of those easy to see national purposes for a national transportation system, the movement of freight across our country, and the Interstate Commerce Act played a large part into that. So this was a focus by Congress having a bigger focus on trying to address freight movement across the country. Okay, so Ivan, before you continue on, we're showing this as a presentation, but Ivan's working live that everyone can get to this off the website. And I know this is, he mentioned that this will be, once we wanted to show it to you first, and then once we're done with this, it'll be live on the website. Last year's is up there right now. But it's a very interactive application that allows you to look at the multiple years, look at the funding, and then the allocations. So I just want to say, Ivan and his team did an outstanding job. Really, last year was the first year that they took the cover off of this. And it's just one of those things that I know I go back to throughout the entire year. And as a commission, hopefully this will be a tool that you feel you can go back to answer questions or to start digging deeper into how you make your decisions. Ivan?
Question from Ivan.
Yes, sir.
On the graph on the bottom of the screen, we talked about the traffic management, which is all orange color. Even though supposedly I-15 is a federal highway, but the management portion of it is a state fund?
Yes. The traffic management division at the TOC is 100% funded with our state funds.
Okay. No matter the federal highway, state highway?
No. Carlos, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can, or if Jason or Terry wants to, they could jump in too. But the traffic management, this is really our traffic operations center. So this is the operating of the system. This isn't projects.
Okay.
Right. I would add, so it's not managing just federal roads. It's managing every road in the state. So IMT program, everything else. So it's not just dedicated to federally eligible roadways.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move now that we've kind of gone through where the money's coming from, how we make any of the adjustments, and define the program values. We're basically going to start from this column on the right, this program summary. We're going to take that a little more granular. So I'm going to click on the allocations, and this is a similar graphic, but it just opens up into more, instead of an aggregated view, it's down to the individual programs. So if I look at freight at the top, that was one that we had a question about. I look at the program itself, whether or not there's action required in this STIP workshop, and since in 2021 it was a federally approved program, it was previously approved. The requested amount was the 13.8, and the proposed amount is 13.9. That should be 13.9 in the requested, I'm sorry.
Ivan, would you, just for giggles and just to make sure everything works, click on freight so they get an idea of what's behind that.
Okay.
Wow.
So each one of these programs have a fact sheet behind it. It lists out some specific projects and accomplishments by that program. We look at another transportation alternatives. And just goes through and starts talking about some of the programs.
So really the purpose of the program, what are the rules or eligibilities for those different program, and some of the things that have been accomplished with it. And all of those are embedded there as links.
Okay, so if we look at some of these here, for example, our high volume road or reconstruction, as we've come through, we've programmed out a proposed value of 161.5 million in our high volume roads. Our statewide program, sorry for the pop-up, our statewide program is taking 1.5 million and holding it, and then programming out to the regions, 33.6 in region 1, 40 million in region 2, 30.4 in region 3, and 56 in region 4. And again, this is in the 2021 year. If I click on the allocations on these other years, and I'll do that right now, I'll go to 22. These values will change based on the projects that they've, 5 demos, it's pulling the same values. Okay, I'm going to send a quick response. Every one of these years will have a different allocation in these programs based on the needs and the assessments of the program managers. So if they're the portfolio managers.
Ivan, I'm gonna throw a curveball at you just because I know you're dealing with one now.
Okay.
But I don't know who's online and who might want to take this. If Nathan wants to take it, if Ben wants to take it, whoever. But we have a number there, a very specific number for high volume roads. Give us a little bit of, where does that number come from, and what are we trying to achieve with that number? Who wants to take that?
Just as a general practice and philosophy, is this ties back to the performance measures that we show on the strategic direction. So we've got performance measures from the past, and then as you model the conditions of the pavement moving forward based on funding scenarios and needs, and I'm not the expert on this, but it predicts a condition, and we have targets. And so my basic understanding is that these dollar amounts try to meet those targets appropriate to each one of the performance measures.
Ben, you hit it out of the park, and I don't know if Ivan could go to the homepage of the UDOT and then go to the strategic document and just show what is driving that recommendation. So go down to the strategic document down there. And go down to, yep. And if you go to preserve infrastructure, you see how much investment for pavements. And if you go down, you can see it's those measures and the targets that we set for those measures that's driving the recommendation. And so this is all done through our asset management process. So recommendations for pavements and bridges, which make up probably 80 to 85% of our asset value, are done through this business approach. So sorry for the curveball, guys. I just wanted the commissioners to appreciate the foundation upon which the recommendations were based.
Carlos, this is Lou. We do appreciate that. Every mile of road we go on, we know it's been carefully looked at. And I think this preservation philosophy of our legislature is absolutely right. Having spent a lot of time in Europe and seeing what they do to preserve their roads, it is critical. So I don't know if my voice is coming, it sounds like it's reverberating, but we really do support this. So thank you.
Well, and you know, it's in statute, there's a requirement for us to look at preservation first. And it really comes down to the, you know, what I think Utahns are really famous for is, you know, taking care of what we have is a fiscal responsibility thing. It's a lower cost of ownership for future generations. And, you know, so we're not passing liabilities on to future generations. And so I know when Kevin was in the legislature as a senator, he believed in this, and he was a very strong advocate for getting money to make that graph on the right, the low volume pavements there. You can see how we've started to turn the corner and how we're, if you look at our projections, how we're going to continue to make a difference. He was one of the strongest advocates for getting that gas tax money, that 5-cent gas tax money for the low volume roads. And you can see it's making a difference.
Absolutely. I do remember that. And we miss him up there, but we're grateful you have the commission, Senator. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Thank you for allowing me to take it on a little bit of a curveball. Ivan, we'll send it back to you.
Okay. So when I'm look back here under the allocations page, again, we've kind of gone through each of these programs. I guess just in reviewing each one of those structures, I'm seeing this one. This one should be consolidated together. I apologize that this is not this 42 million. This is the federal program, and this is a state program. For some reason, it's not aggregating these together in a total, but their amount here is reflective of that additional federal money that was received in prior years and in future years. This federal dollar amount from structures is 33 million. If I click back here on our on our funding flow in a future year, I should be able to see structures. The federal dollars is 33 and the state is 15. But with this year, with that additional one-time money that we talked about, you'll notice the structures goes to 42 million this year. That's also just, I jump back and forth, and I'm sorry, I hope I'm not making anybody motion sick on this. You'll just notice that federal highways 397.3, and next year it goes to 382, the difference being that one-time money that came at the end of January. So going back to...
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
Since we're pointed at structures, after the earthquake, I know we've had one bridge that we've kind of taken people off. What have we learned, and how did we do?
Okay, and Chris, are you on the call?
I am.
Chris Peterson, go ahead, tell us where, what we went through, what we've, where we're at today, and if we learned anything.
So that morning,
Chris Peterson's our Director of Project Development, and the Structures Division it's one of the divisions that reports to Chris.
so that morning of the earthquake, we received, just like everybody else, we received actual physical notice of the earthquake, right? As we were starting our day. Within an hour, we had received our update from our software as to which bridges were likely to be impacted by the earthquake. That numbered over 600, actually just over 700. And we immediately mobilized our structures inspectors and our maintenance station staff to go out and look and inspect each of those bridge locations based on priority and likelihood that we would see some damage. Within the first day, we'd inspected over 100 of those. We identified one structure that we had concerns, and so we closed it and scheduled an inspection for Saturday the following day. Otherwise, we found 18 bridges that we weren't concerned for their overall safety. And we are right now doing inspections on those 18. Majority of the issues we noticed were cosmetic. And then the other bridge that we had closed at Union Park and I-215, we inspected and determined that we could open it and that it did not suffer any damage based on what we thought might have happened. So all of our system is up and open right now. Occasionally, today I think we're closing a few lanes at 3 bridges where we're going to do some follow-up inspections and confirm what our initial assumptions were. So we learned that our system did quite well. We have some very minor repairs to do at our structures, but overall they survived exactly the way we had hoped they would.
Kevin, does that answer your question? Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Ivan, back to you.
Okay. I'm going to do a quick refresh on this one, just to make sure that we're picking them up. Back to our allocations here. As we come down, we've got our actions required. I want to open this up to any questions. Are there any questions that are open that people have that we could talk through? During that little break for me, I sent a couple of quick responses. It looks like they've caught up to the 2022, so I can see the different allocation from 21 into 22. Oh, it's still picking it up.
Okay, so Ivan, maybe just quickly review. You have, what programs are you going to be looking for action on, and when?
So what our expectation? I'm going to go back to the calendar here, and I think that's an easy way to look through these. Mm-hmm. Any of these programs where we see this orange, next month we will be bringing back in our workshop part 2. We will be bringing back projects that reflect the values of the money in these orange shaded years. So in some of them it will be a 2023 project, and others it will be 2021, either a project or a program. And we'll see those in the Thursday April staff meeting, the Thursday meeting for the commission. And then on Friday we'll be taking a motion to the commission, essentially looking for the approval of the distribution within the programs, not necessarily the projects, but in looking at these values on how the money gets distributed by the fund type and our program summary here. We will be asking for a motion to approve the use of this amount of money in these programs.
In the April commission meeting.
In the April commission meeting. And then in the following commission meeting, we will be taking or requesting action or requesting an approval for the projects that will be presented next month. So if I'm looking back to our calendar here that Ben introduced earlier, Ben talked about how we introduce here in this month, and we look to take action in this month. So we'll be taking the March values and asking for approval in April, and then the list of the projects will then be given to the commission, and then in a later commission meeting, asking for approval on that project list to advertise down here, advertise our draft STIP, and receive public comment.
So if there's any questions, maybe while you're thinking up some questions, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the federal program. And Ivan, would you go back to the app? I'd just like to talk a little bit about the federal program. So the FAST Act expires September 30th of this year. And so, you know, the Senate EPW, Environment and Public Works, had put forward a proposed reauthorization bill. They put it out the last week of July of 2019, which was really early, but really good. So they put that marker out there. And the House side, T&I, Transportation and Infrastructure, has been working on, they put out just basically general principles for a bill. And staff has been working on bill language and some more specifics. All of that work still may be going on, but at a fairly low staff level at this point. And so as we look to the future, we have to, you know, make guesses as to what that federal funding level might be. So what we've done as we look at the federal program, we're programmed out past that authorizing bill. And so we've basically made the assumption that the federal program will be moving forward flat from the last year of the FAST Act. And so I think it's a conservative approach. It's harder for Congress, believe it or not, it's harder for Congress to take away from a program than it is to add to a program, is what I've learned in my time. And so we're recommending a program to the commission that's based on projecting this out flat here into the future years. And, you know, if they can come up with a increased project, you know, value so they can add more money to it, then great. We come to the commission and we program more money. It's always harder to take away. So what I expect is that Congress is going to be distracted, and it gets, you know, even if we weren't dealing with the present situation, we're dealing with an election year. And doing big things during, you know, really past June of an election year is not what we normally see. So I expect a continuing resolution, which means we'll be continuing the federal program. They'll typically punt it to December, to a lame duck session of Congress. And I'm expecting that we'll have a CR that will, you know, authorize 2.5 months at the last year of the FAST Act levels, which is not at all convenient, but it's not atypical for the way this has been handled. So I don't know if there's questions about any of that or about what Ivan has presented. I'll just be quiet for a second and see if anyone has any questions.
Question for Ivans, please.
Yes, sir.
On your timeline, we look at the TIF programmed all the way to 2025. So that means that if there's no money, nothing can be accepted for that category until 25?
Can I ask to table this question because I believe Terry's going to answer it next.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay.
Carlos, if I may.
Yes, Terry.
Ivan, could you please go to the allocations tab for 21 in the STIP app? Just so the commissioners understand what we're asking for here, there is flexibility here, and I just want to maybe have you think about a couple areas. I'm just going to try to look down here, see if I can find them. For instance, one thing that changed probably 2 years ago was the commission felt strongly about giving the regions more contingency money, and their number moved from 1 million per region to 1.5. And so you see that the region contingency now totals 6 million. Those are the types of things that the commission commented on, and then we make changes. So each one of these categories, we generally try to keep a pretty even program going for most of the programs. But then as things come up, and which each program, as they meet with you throughout the year, they request if there's additional money they think they need to keep their program running. So each one of these categories gets looked at, and generally they stay the same unless we have some compelling reason to make an adjustment to them. So just wanted to, I don't know if that helps you think about what your role in this is. We present to you what we think the needs are, and then there's always room for questions and adjustments, because as long as we make sure we total up to the right amount, adjustments can be made there. I just want to point out one of them that we have added is for planning studies. That was not on the list for last year, and we have that in there. The print is really small. We have it in there for 800,000. So that's a new category that we have there. And those are the types of things we want to make you aware of and have you think about. And that would be something we'd be looking for a level of support on next month.
Well, and Terry, take a minute right now. And why is there a proposal to spend 800,000 on planning?
So we have tried to make an increased effort in our area of planning and to have money available to help do corridor studies to make sure that we are proceeding the right way, being consistent with the community, and then help providing for the regions, especially in high development areas. Trying to provide a plan for a corridor is really helpful as we move along. So we've got a recommendation that we'll bring to you next month for specific corridor studies. I believe we've got recommendations for one from each region that we would like to move ahead with.
Questions for Terry? Okay, we don't need to belabor it. And again, anytime over the next month, I know you'll be spending a lot of time working through this Stip app. If you've got questions, anyone, whether it be region directors, Terry's team, Jason's team, any of them, please give us a call and let us know. Do we want to move on, Nagi?
Hey, Carlos, this is Jim.
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Jim. And Nagi, you're muted, by the way.
In honor of my esteemed colleagues, would it be possible to have a 5-minute bio break before we go for the last hour?
I'm sorry, I'm slow. I've been told to turn off my mic when I'm not talking. So, of course. So it's about noon. Do we want to come back in 12:05 or 12:10? What's the sense of the commission?
Let's do 10 minutes, Carlos.
Okay, let's do 10 minutes. 12:10 return point. Thank you, Jim.
Speaking of someone that's come in and come out, it works great.
Carlos, do you want everyone to go out of the meeting or just take their microphone and video off?
I don't care if they want to keep their mics and video on. Maybe Jim will play a song for us. It depends on how self-conscious you are.
Natalie and I are working out a song here, right, Natalie? No, just kidding.
Jim is the one asked the question to go, so he's not going to entertain us until he returns.
I'm not going to entertain you at least for 2 minutes. Thanks.
Okay.
So we're back at 10 after.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I have 12:10. Do you think we're ready to go?
We are ready to go, please, yes.
Ivan, are you still up, or are we moving to the next item on the agenda?
I believe we're ready to move to the next agenda. I have the programming team that's helping me update these, the allocations. For some reason, the link is stuck, and we think we have it fixed, and it works for us. And then it jumps back to each one of these allocations is referring to the 2021 allocation. So I'm not going to. We don't know what the issue is. This is based off of a Google's data studio. We know that Google's had problems this morning. They've had some issues on their end, but where we are on a government, specifically a government server, that's why we haven't experienced that. But this is outside of that server, so I don't know if that's the issue that we keep seeing a little bit of a flip back and forth. So I apologize, we're not seeing the different pages. I thought we had it, I mean, it was working just a second ago during the break, and now we're back. So if it's okay, well, I would like to move to our next item, which Terry's talking about, the Transportation Investment Fund and the TTIF, and we will keep trying to work on why we can't get this, the new pages to be refreshed. And by the end of the workshop, we'll come back to this. Is that all right?
Yes.
Yeah, Ivan, that's good. And what I would suggest, if we can't get it by the end of the workshop, we send an email to the commissioners when it is up and running.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Great job, Ivan. Really, really good stuff.
Thank you.
Terry?
Real quick, my last item, I just want to highlight the jurisdictional transfers. This item here, you'll notice that we're requesting 0 funds, but we're continuing to leave this item on there. This jurisdictional transfer is typically used when we exchange a road or give a road to a local entity. We've historically given them money to help with maintenance prior to the B&C road distribution fund to kick in. We feel like we've got a pretty healthy balance in this account right now, and so we are not requesting any additional money in 21, and we're forecasting no additional money requested in 22 and 23. So just this one looks abnormal because we have a 0 in the request and 0 in the proposed, and that's why that's happening. Okay. With that being the case, we'll jump back over here. Terry, would you like to start with the TIF or the TTIF?
Let's start with the TIF.
Okay.
It looks like you're in the right spot for that. And maybe I'll just start out by answering a previous question of Donna's, and it was about 20 million for the there was 20 million that was going to be going from TIF for a legislated earmark. We will have to replace money on that project. So we will have to find a place for that out of TIF. And while we already have TIF programs through 2024 and partway into 2025, we make adjustments to that program as we go. And as you know, at each commission meeting, sometimes we'll have a shortfall on a certain project. And what we do to deal with that is adjust the cash flow for projects. If we have a project that may not spend all of its money in a certain year, we may adjust theirs in some of the out years. That's how we're managing that program right now. So you'll still see shifts we'll need to make. We also need to bring money to 90th South. You remember we took that off a couple commission meetings ago in order to make up a shortfall for a high bid that came in. We're going to continue to see things like that happening, and we will have to adjust the cash flow as we go. Sometimes it will be a commission action if it changes a project value, and sometimes it is just adjusting when we need to spend the money, and that's an action that we can take. But anything that adjusts the project amount, that's something we're going to come back to the commission with. So that's 20 through 24, and that's how we're going to continue to deal with things that come up in the near term. And again, with everything going on right now, we expect that we're going to have some adjustments we're going to need to make as things go. And what we don't expect to have to do is have a problem once we take a project to construction. What we'll do is carefully monitor, working with Becky on a very, very close basis, making sure that we have enough money for construction projects. We may at some point have to make a decision to hold off advertising a project. But that's something that we'll only do if we have to, but we'll always make sure we have enough for the projects that are active. So just wanted to put that out there and see if there are any questions on anything with the current program, which is FY20 through 24. Okay, I'll move ahead then. And what we've got up on the screen right now are our funding projections. And for the sake of, I think I always have Lou in mind when we look at numbers, and I have rounded these numbers. They are not exactly as I received them from Becky because I rounded them. Since they are since they are estimates, we've rounded them to the nearest million just for ease of use here. So these are the numbers from fiscal 25 through 29. And what Linda alluded to a bit earlier is with legislation this year, they said that they wanted us to consider programming beyond the normal horizon. And so, yes, we can consider that, but I think that right now we feel like we're in anything but normal situation. So I think we'll have to, that's something we need to consider. And I think what we'll do is, I'll just talk about philosophy a little bit today, and what we'll do next month is bring you what we think is a recommended program. At one point, we had talked about, do we fund projects from fiscal 25 through 29? That amounts to, when you add all those up, it amounts to about $4 billion. And the way we would program that would be with the prioritization process. And as Linda said, that was something that the legislature was supportive of that prioritization process that we worked so hard to get into place. So Ivan, if I could have you pull up you have the PDF of the ranked projects of TIF, yes.
Terry, can I just add a word here? My intent here as we make this decision moving forward is I'm going to have conversations obviously with the governor's office and with legislative leadership to get a sense here in another week or so of what kind of flexibility they might want to have on this. Having that long-term commitment of projects coming at us, at our contractors, might send a very good signal that we're assuring that work's going to be out there, but they may want a little more flexibility. So we'll have those conversations, and I think at the minimum you might see a recommendation to, if it's not to program out full through 29, it's to make sure that we're setting up projects to be able to be successful for doing that in the near future. Sorry, Terry, that's all I had.
No, that's perfect, Carlos. I think that what Carlos said hits both ends of the spectrum. We could program out through 29, but we could also look at what we might program through 29 and maybe do some prep work for those projects. For instance, we could make sure that we have environmental documents done. We could make sure that we have early utility work done. We could make sure that we've got money for strategic right-of-way purchases. So that's something that we're going to be looking at in the next few weeks. And our recommendation will be somewhere between some early action items we might be able to fit into our program. And then at the far end of the spectrum would be doing a full program through 2029. So I think, as Carlos said, you'll see us recommend something in between those two ranges. And what Ivan's got up on the screen right now, we divided our TIF highway ranked list also into two separate categories. We have one for the Metropolitan Planning Organization area and for the non-MPO area. The non-MPO area was supposed to help us try to get to more of the rural area and try to find a way to bring some of those projects in as well. So Ivan, maybe I'll have you scroll down. We have the list here. This is the entire list with everything put together. And then if he scrolls down to the next list, this one gives it ranked by MPO. And just to give you a sense of how far we can go down this list, when I mentioned that in the years fiscal 25 through 29, we have about $4 billion, that would allow us to get to somewhere in the neighborhood of the top 20 projects on the MPO filter list, and maybe the top 2 or 3 projects on the rural list, just in terms of strictly adding up the dollars. So that just gives you a sense of where we could get to if we programmed that next 5 years. So that's something, again, we'll be working on, is what makes sense for us to program, and how many of those projects do we start to look at. And I think what we'll be doing is looking at projects maybe 1 through 20 and saying, what environmental documents would we like to get started with? What things might make sense for, like I said, early utility work or potentially early right-of-way work. So, and Ivan, maybe if you would scroll down to the non-MPO list, just for everyone to get it. And I know that text is really small, and I think that's something we'll try to work on for next meeting, is to try to make this show up a little bit larger for you. So, and Ivan's trying to zoom in there a little bit. But anyway, if you look at the top 2 or 3 projects, we could potentially get to those if we've programmed out through 29. Right now, that's not looking advisable, but that's something that we're going to keep working on. So, and then also, Ivan, now if you would scroll down to, I believe we have active transportation. Yes. So also, this is a list that we have not shown you the ranked version yet. So this is probably the first time you're seeing this. And Ivan, if you, oh, yep, he's trying to make sure he can fit that on the screen. Thank you, Ivan. This shows you the ranked list. In the past, we showed you the projects that were submitted. Now, this is the first time you're getting a chance to see how they ranked. So this is another thing we want to take into account when we look at what we might program. Do we want to put some active transportation projects in that list of things we program as well? So this one also, this active transportation list would apply to the TIF funding. And so with the 3 lists, there's the TIF highway MPO, there's the TIF highway non-MPO, and there's the TIF active. So between these 3 lists, that would make up what the program recommendations would be coming to you guys next month. So with that, I think I've talked a little bit of philosophy. I've talked about the money that's available, and I've talked about the ranked list. And now I'll stop and catch a breath and let you guys ask questions.
So you're proposing, Terry, the TIF active transportation also will be projected until 2029? Could be?
So I think with active transportation, we haven't figured out what the right mix of projects is. And that's certainly, I think the way our process is done is we will make a recommendation about projects to you guys, and that will be done in a public setting. And then that gives a chance for the public to be able to comment on what we're proposing. And then that feedback comes back to the commission and helps inform the decision of which projects are chosen. So I think it's a bit of an open discussion how far, if any, we do on the active transportation list. What we have is the opportunity through TIF to be able to program active transportation. But again, how far we go down that list is something that has to be decided. And I think we're willing to make some recommendations. I think it would be great if we could get a couple of projects in there, but I think we're going to have to see how the money looks.
I think that's an important point, Terry. So we haven't programmed any money in the active side, whether it be TTIF or TIF. And if we're going to program TIF active, we're essentially going to have to take out, we're going to have to find the money from within the existing TIF projects that we have already programmed. And so I would think we would, if we're going to recommend TIF active projects, but probably for, I don't know if it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years out, certainly not to 29. These change on a much faster basis, the needs for that. So I would not recommend programming out more than 2 to 3, 4 years at the most for the active section.
Okay.
So, and it looks like Lou had a question on why there are so few in the Region 3 and Region 4 area. And I would say that another reason that we might want to not program too far out with active transportation is we had a fairly short window where we were accepting project nominations. And I think we could do a better job of getting information out to everyone so that they submitted projects. Now, we can't really put projects on this list ourselves because each one of these requires a 40% match. So we really need to see that application come from a local entity, someone who's going to put money in it in addition to state money. So we need those applications to come from someone else. The reason we don't have very many from 3 and 4 is that they weren't submitted. So I think if maybe we pick some projects to try to program and then allow the option, we would redo the list again next year and allow that option for people to submit more projects. We might have a more robust list when people have a longer time frame to think about what projects they might submit. It was a little difficult, I think, for some people to come up with a 40% match in short order. We didn't give them a whole lot of time to do that.
I think, Terry, that's a really good point, that it was a very short window for the locals to do this. And to find the commitment of 40%, most of them have to go to their councils for that. I would say, though, Lou, that Region 3 has the largest dollar value project in the active list.
Yeah.
If you look at the Provo Canyon one.
Yeah.
Yep. Good point, Carlos.
Okay, so if there are no other questions on TIF, I'd be glad to move on to TTIP. Okay, I think that's a silence means go ahead, Ivan. If you would pull up the TTIP. Okay, thank you. So I believe Becky showed this, or her estimates for TTIP, but just to go through, we look at TIF and TTIP a little bit different than we do the rest of the program. We don't just look at them a year at a time. These are usually projects that extend over multiple years. So we look at it as a longer term program. Now I've shown fiscal 20 through 25 on here. That does not mean we propose funding through 25. It just gives you a snapshot of how much money is available. You can see in the red the items that were earmarks, and so those are already subtracted out of the revenue projections. So I did have off the top of my head, and I didn't write it down, I had a total for TTIP and now I don't remember what it was. So if somebody quickly adds those up, anyway, the total through 2025, but you can see the money that we have available. Fiscal 20, we have 6.6 million, goes up to 8.9 million, and then 21.5. So we start to see some pretty substantial amounts of money in that program. So again, our prioritization process helps inform us on what the projects we have to choose from to program. And on TTIP, each one of these has a 40% match. So these, again, are dependent on applications being submitted to us. And I will say that similar to the active transportation in TIF, there wasn't a lot of time to put these applications in, so we probably do not have the most robust list of projects here, with the exception of first mile, last mile. I think we got quite a few applications. But if there are any questions about the revenue, the one thing we did not show here, we do have the restricted sub-account that Linda talked about for rail. We don't show it in here because it's not subject to the same programming criteria. And like Linda mentioned, we likely won't, the commission won't be programming those funds. So even though it is a sub-account of TTIP, we're not showing it as part of our revenues or as part of our programming actions. Okay, and
Terry, would you please also mention about the match? What can be constituted as a match? Cash, property, labor, sweat equity?
so I believe that we do allow, and I may ask Ben to confirm this because Ben always knows the rules. I believe that we do allow a soft match with this, but it is a 40% match. It needs to be non-state funds. And Ben, can you just confirm for me that soft match is allowed?
Yeah, it's an in-kind match is what is defined in the rule, R940-6. So there's a definition in there, but that's right, Commissioner. It's right away design effort, things like that. But I would refer to the R940-6 rule for the definition of the in-kind match.
Okay.
This is Linda, Commissioner. So I'll tell you that when we originally drafted that section of code about the 40% match, what I had in mind at the time is that it could be cash or it could be soft match. But the way that the language was finally came out and written, it made it sound like it could only be cash. So I changed the code last year to make it clear that it could be any kind of contribution. It could be cash or soft match.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions on the revenue, I'll have Ivan pull up. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, it's Donna. It looks like the revenue estimate actually decreases rather than increases in 2023. Is there a specific reason for that?
I may phone a friend for that one. Is Becky still on? It looks like she is. Becky, can you jump in and help with that one? Why the number for the sales tax revenue goes down in fiscal 23 on TTIF? Okay, maybe can someone text Becky and ask her that question, and we'll try to get that answer, and then we'll just maybe move on.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ivan, can you pull up the ranked transit? Yes, thank you. So you can see there are only 6 projects that were submitted. And again, as I mentioned, it's likely that with the short amount of time, it was pretty difficult for everyone to come up with a commitment to the match. And that was necessary as part of this process to be able to show that the match was available. So we have, if you look at the first few projects there, Ogden Bus Rapid Transit, $4 million. That's a project that is already has the funding, and this would just be an additional little bit they need to have that one proceed. And we've got the Mid-Valley Connector, buses for a new route, Logan Historic Downtown. So with this list, we could go partway down the list. We could fund out a couple of years worth. Again, I think we have not had everything submitted here that might be. And one thing just to keep in mind is Linda mentioned the strategic business plan for Frontrunner that was funded for $1.6 million. I think it would be good to see what they come up with out of that plan and whether the TTIF funding would be something that it would be important to use for some of the future Frontrunner work as well if there's no other funding available for it. So that's another thing we need to work on, and I guess is a philosophy discussion. How far do we go down this list in funding projects? And then if Ivan, you can scroll down in this one and get to the first mile, last mile. These are also funded out of TTIF. You can see we had 14 projects, and this is, so with both of these lists, the TTIF.
Terry?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but on that last list, I think I've texted Becky. I'm trying to get her to call me back on that question, but on the TTIF list, not only is the 40% match, but there's a commitment from the operator for that they have to be able to pay to operate it and maintain it into the future. So it's a pretty big lift there for, the transit operator to nominate a project.
Okay.
Correct. And so it's not as simple as just writing up an application and turning it in. There is a lot of legwork that needs to be done. And again, we were on a pretty short window to try to get applications in, and so I think everybody did the best they could to get projects submitted. So maybe, Ivan, if you scroll down to the TTIF, first mile, last mile. Yes, thank you. So we do have some projects that we've talked about before that were submitted for both lists, and you see we have a triple asterisk. And if you get a triple asterisk, that means you submitted on both TIF active and TTIF first mile, last mile. So some of those projects are doubled up on both lists. I think people were just trying to increase their opportunity to get funding. So we have some decisions to make on how far do we go down this list. And I think one of the things that we've talked about on our team is we have a lot of lessons learned through this prioritization process. And there might be some things that we'd suggest to the commission that we adjust somewhat about our process so that we don't have projects overlapping between both lists and have them trying to qualify as more of a long distance trail that goes across multiple communities versus connecting to a transit system. We might need to clarify a little bit more some of the requirements for submittal so that will help us not have projects on both lists. So I guess there's so same as with TIF, we have revenue projections and we have two sets of ranked lists to look at and try to decide what we think makes the most sense in terms of using the funding that we project that we'll have available to us. So I put that all out to you guys, put out the philosophy, put out the funding, put out the ranked lists, and the job for us to do by next month is to put a proposal to you of projects that we might fund in those years. So with that, I'll be quiet and let you guys ask questions and have discussions about what you think the philosophy should be.
Terry, this is Jim Evans. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What type of, in the prioritization process, do we also look at, I think sometimes I know where we have a matching grant that comes in from somewhere and we have the danger of the grant going away for like 2 or 3 or whatever $1 million. I presume that we'd want to look at that in terms of the prioritization process to try to maximize the money that we put into a project as well. Is there anywhere in the process that we look at that?
We don't have anything in our technical scoring for that, but I think that is exactly the kind of input that should come to the commission. That, hey, we've got money here, and someone can certainly make that appeal to the commission that you have potential of losing money if you can't put it to work if you don't if your project is not chosen. I think that what this process allows is us to take the scores and then after that take other things into account. The only thing we need to do is do that in a public commission meeting, and certainly that has become much more difficult with us doing everything electronic, and so we're trying to make sure that we're reaching out in whatever ways we can to have people give us that input, including with the commission meeting tomorrow, trying to allow that public comment to come in through emails or whatever form it comes in and let people participate in the electronic meeting. So if you've got suggestions on how we take that input and bring it to the commission so that we can read it in a public meeting, someone has an opportunity to give us video and audio as long as they give it to us 24 hours before the meeting. So in advance of the meeting in April, if anyone wants to give us that type of information, we can make sure that it gets read or shown to the commission during the meeting in April so that it has that ability to be put in front of you in a public meeting.
Thank
That was
you.
a really long answer to a short question.
So there is an opportunity to consider that, and you just mentioned how that might happen. So thank you.
Terry, it's Donna. I too have a question about our ability to adapt as opportunities and development comes along. For instance, only last year we knew that a good portion of the state office people were going to move to the American Express building. Do we have the ability in this to be adaptable to opportunities as they change?
So one of the things we've usually talked about is once a project is funded, then we try not to mess with unfunding it, I guess I'll say. But when we're in this process of prioritization, ranking, and then the commission funding projects, that is all open territory. What we try to give you is a technical score. So we've ranked everything by technical score. And the next piece of it is where you can take into account those other things. And that's the really important piece that occurs. So what we'll try to do is put together a package of funding for you to look at next month, and then be able to take all those comments on that proposed package of funding, either from the public or from the commission, and then make adjustments to that. It seems like Carlos is probably trying to reach Becky here, and he is maybe not listening, so I can say it while he's not listening. It may be that we don't actually, oh no, he's back. Oh, here. But it may be that we maybe don't get to a full approval of a package of projects in May. It may be that we have enough feedback on those that we need to adjust it and put it out again. So maybe Carlos can react to that a little bit, but I think we want to approve the right things. And while we're trying to keep this moving along so that we kind of keep the business moving, we also want to make sure that we've taken that appropriate level of input that we need to.
Thank you.
Carlos, any reaction to that?
Sorry. It takes me a little bit to turn off the mute. I didn't hear it all. Becky's looking all into right now why that went down. She's wondering if it's a typo that Donna caught. And there's multiple legislators and legislative fiscal analysts calling right now, and everyone's in a little bit of panic over money. So the question, I think, was how far down the TTIF list we go?
No, Carlos, the question was if we put together a program of funding for the commission to review, and we have comments that need to be made and adjustments to it, we may not necessarily approve a program in May if it's too soon, that we may end up having to wait an additional month.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's a really important point, because we have this ranking process, and you look at the ranking process, it's kind of this, you throw it in the machine. You guys did the best you could trying to come up with the criteria and the weighting. But at the end of the day, the commission needs to make a decision how they're going to spend the public's money. There's a lot of money. And there's other things. You can make other decisions. You can pick projects. You don't have to go 1, 2, 3 down the list. But you need to do that in a public meeting with discussion as to the why you'd want to do it. And so that public process is important. So if we make recommendations in April based on the ranking system, process that you have adopted, we're just making those recommendations. But you as commissioners, you want to hear from the public. You're going to want to hear from the local elected officials. Legislators may want to weigh in. That input weighs into your decision-making process. And you can have that conversation commission meeting. So if you come back in May and you still want to get more input, we can wait till June, because we're, at the end of the day, making the right decision is more important than making a fast decision.
That's great.
Thank you.
I think I've said everything I was going to say on TIF and TTIF, and just kind of the reminder that we would put a program, a proposed program of funding in front of the commission next month, try to get all that feedback we can. If you guys have additional ways that you would like us to take that public input, we're just kind of we were doing everything we could to get this meeting together electronically and make sure that we were correct by law about how we were doing it, but also making sure that we were correct with the intent of getting the public involvement piece of this. So if there's more you'd like to see us do there, we're going to continue to work on that in the next month and make sure that we are providing all the opportunities for the public, for politicians, for local officials, for everyone to comment in the way they need to, and then make sure that we can get that into the public record. Okay, and with that, I think that's the end of the agenda, unless Ivan, was there anything left on there? And do I throw it back to Carlos for him to close us out?
That is the end of the agenda. I do want to go back. I've been testing it out on a second system while we've been talking through that, and it looks like we're able to see these allocations change because the federal version, the federal dollar, is maintaining relatively flat. There's minimal change in the state transportation fund. We do not see a lot of differences on the program values off the side, but it does look like so in 2021, let me point out a couple of changes. The structures going from 45 to 57. If I look at 2022, it goes to 48 to 57, that $9 million that are there. In 23, the value on structure stays the same. The high volume distribution, I did confirm the high volume and low volume between the region stays the same distribution. The reconstruction values change year to year. I jump back from 23 to 22. You'll notice the values change. The other thing, the one last thing that I wanted to, or one of the last things I want to talk about, we talked about our traffic and safety, our traffic management, and our structures program, and how there are several sub-programs that are associated with them. We've got some links down here that help elaborate on some of these items. I'm going to pick this sub-programs, and what this one's going to do is shows the 2021 allocation. For example, our traffic and safety received $42.28 million, and it goes through and talks about what each one of those, if they have a sub-program that they're working in, that they're allocating money to, it goes through and shows what that is. So we can look at traffic and safety, our structures between their statewide bridge and their preventative maintenance program, our traffic management division, and the 4 programs that account for those funds. So you just be able to see how those programs are broken out. So rather than taking and exploding our allocations list, if you would like to dive in deeper into each one of these 3 programs and the type of money that's funding it. So you'll notice that under structures and our bridge program, which is our rehabilitation program, it's a majority of federal funded with a little bit of state, but their preventative maintenance is mostly is more state dollars than federal. Traffic management, that was a question earlier, and how it's funded. And then our traffic and safety program. There's one anomaly here, and this is our federal transportation alternatives program. It is a safe routes to school, and what we do is this is a federally funded program that we swap with state dollars and end up programming this program with state dollars instead of federal. It helps our program manager in this program to utilize state funding instead of the federal. So we do a swap with our low volume program of 1.4 million. Also, just to finish a couple of this TAP distribution, this is our transportation alternatives. That 1.4, I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this. talked about the safe routes to school, that federal transportation alternative swap. That's where this one comes from. And then the 1.4 million of transportation alternatives of 0.35 for each region. And I want to just link back to our allocations. Here's our transportation alternatives. Shows our volume statewide. That's the 1.4. And then the 0.35 across the board for each region. Okay, and so it should, again, I'm going to go back to our homepage, our UDOT homepage. Under the UDOT homepage, we have the Transportation Commission. As soon as we finish here, the app that I've been discussing will be changed here to the program. If I click on this, it pulls up the 2020, 21, and 22 instead of the 21, 22, and 23 that we've been discussing. And it appears that the bug that we had about freezing between the allocations of the years has been worked out.
So Ivan, while you're under that page, under reconstruction, Region 2 doesn't have anything listed. They don't need the money, they don't want to, or what? Errors.
When I was talking with the region or with the asset management, the next year they receive all of it.
Okay.
Yeah, Nagi, that's a really good point. So as we go through and look at the performance measures, the asset management team and the pavement management engineers out of all the regions and central, they look at doing the right treatment at the right time. A reconstruction tends to be when we have to get in and treat things from the bottom up. We don't have a lot of those, but when we do, they're really big. And so they tend to be spaced out. So regions, I've seen once before where a region took 2 full years. One region, one project took 2 full years of that funding.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ivan, anything else?
No, that was it. I just wanted to circle back on how to navigate to that and update that those links are working.
You're very good, because I was going to ask you to do that before you got out of here. So very good. Commissioners, any questions on anything? I've got Becky standing by. What I'd like to do is ask her to jump in right now and explain or address Donna's question. And then we'll come back and see if there's any questions on any subject. And it can be what was talked about here today, or you could broaden it out and ask me questions on anything transportation related, on any subject. And if after we do that, then I want to see if we want to have a little summary about how we're going to have, how the commission meeting is going to work tomorrow. I know we've done that one-on-one. And so I'll ask Ben maybe then to just give us a quick little summary on how we're going to do the commission meeting, particularly the receiving of the public comments, because that's the piece that's going to be different than what we did today. So can I turn the time to Becky, and then we'll come back to questions from commissioners.
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry about that. I was taking another call and didn't hear my name being called. So to understand the TTIF money, where that's coming from.
And Ivan, maybe go back to that TTIF spreadsheet. Sorry.
So the money that's going into TTIF, what it is when the gas tax per gallon exceeds 29.4 cents per gallon, the difference, 35% of that is going to go to the Transportation Investment Fund. And when that happens, they're going to reduce our sales tax by that same amount and give it to TTIF. So that's what you see, that revenue coming in. And when I'm looking at the consensus numbers from LFA, they're showing that yes, TTIF is growing from 2020 to 2022, and then it drops 6% in 2023. I think they're just trying to show that it's not going to continually keep going up, and at some point we're going to take a dip, and then it's going to come back up 16% in 2024. And this is all based on motor fuel.
And these are all LFA numbers, not UDOT numbers.
Correct.
Okay.
Does that help?
So Donna, good question. Sometimes when you try to understand the logic behind where things come from, it makes you a little crazier. But this is the numbers we've been given to work with.
Okay. Okay. That's, thank you.
Okay, good catch.
Thank you.
Now, let's open it up. Questions regarding anything talked about today, and then maybe if there isn't any, then you guys can ask questions on any other subject.
Well, good job doing presentation, all of you. That's my comment.
Yeah, this is quite an adjustment. I just was wondering if there was anything in particular that we needed to be prepared for tomorrow, having reviewed the agenda and everything.
Yeah, I don't see anything on the agenda that looks significant. I mean, Ivan, can you bring up tomorrow's agenda?
That is it right there. That is for tomorrow.
Yeah, right there. You'll notice, and I think we talked about it individually, that the public comment period is moved a little down on the list. That's deliberate. It's to try to provide the public with that maybe just joining us at 8:30 with the pathway to provide a public comment, and they would do it through that email address, transportationcommission@utah.gov. And what we'll do is we'll have Eileen Barron, who works in Terry's shop, and she will read those comments. Now, there's a couple other paths that they've been given to make comments. They could submit a video or audio file. We've asked that those be submitted 24 hours before the meeting. So I don't know if we've received any yet. And that was for our folks to be able to go through those and be able to tee them up. So we wanted to be able to provide local government officials with the opportunity to be on camera or to be able to verbalize it instead of just feeling like they needed to write it down. And so we will have those two paths to make public comments. I don't know if Ben wants to add, change, or fix anything I said.
The only thing that I would add is that there was one more option there. If they contacted Heather, they could join the live meeting and make a comment. We could have those queued up and they can speak during the meeting also.
That's right. Ivan, would you go down a little farther? I mean, as you look at the business items there, it's not again, it's in the eye of the beholder, I guess, but I don't see it as a big lift on the items there. So, Don, I don't think there's anything that might be a surprise.
Okay. I didn't see anything either. I just thought while we had this opportunity, it made sense to ask.
Okay, good.
Only thing will be different for tomorrow. I've been asked by our legal counsel to read a script at the beginning of the meeting about why we're doing this and how the public should know. And also the voting, the motion and the second, and will be by roll call. So I will call every commission by name to get their votes for the record. So those other will be different for tomorrow, but I will make sure right in the introduction, I will mention those script of the legal counsel tomorrow.
And Nagi, you'll also be making a statement near the end, I believe.
Yes. Yes, I will do the same.
Regarding that, basically looking for an affirmative statement from each commissioner that you've participated in the meeting.
Just remember, you need to come in and you need to stay in until we call that last minute roll call to confirm that everybody was there, that they heard everything, all the proceedings, and they're still there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for your time. I think this worked as well as I could have hoped. And I can't give enough credit to, Terry won't take it, but it was her team, Jordan, Ivan, Ben, and many others that worked long and hard to try to make this come together in as seamless a way as possible. And they did a lot of preparation that they were not anticipating having to do just a couple of weeks ago, because they do a lot of work just getting ready for this meeting. And so I want to thank them.
No,
Sorry.
Thank you.
Congratulations to all. Good job.
Yes, indeed.
Tomorrow will be a little bit more of a high wire walking act with the public comment portion. And, you know, for all of us, I know how important it is that the public feels they have that opportunity to be able to provide their input, their guidance, because you guys all make better decisions with that input. So
Right.
that's the part I hope we learn from that. And what I'd like to do is to see if after the meeting, if you have any thoughts on how we could make the public involvement portion more meaningful. I do anticipate our April meeting will probably be in this same format. We're planning for that. Be nice to, we can hope for a face-to-face, but I think we need to plan for this. And, but if you could think of better ways to do this, we'd really appreciate that. So if there's any questions on anything.
I just want to comment, Carlos, that I thought it went as well as we could expect, and I think the interaction was strong. So I'm optimistic about tomorrow.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Okay, I don't want to belabor the point. Everyone's busy. I want to thank you all, and one of the things I probably don't have to say now is drive safe, buckle up.
Everybody's buckled up at home.
So this might be really good for our safety reports, guys, is what I'm hoping for. So
Oh, wow. Yeah.
thank you all, and I'll see you tomorrow at 8:30.
We are very fortunate to work with you. Thank you very much. See you again.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm off the call, honey.